wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the other side of the sea saw that there had been only one boat there. They also saw that Jesus had not got into the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, 'He gave them bread from heaven to eat.'" Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of this holy word this day.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated.
I've been trying to decide since yesterday if I should apologize before I begin my sermon today, because I'm going to be talking about bread again. And I just talked to you all about bread a couple of weeks ago and made everybody hungry. And so I'm going to talk about bread again. That's how it worked out. So I'll just apologize for making you all hungry today. But we have a lot of bread, so we'll get you fed. I don't know if I've shared with all of you that I grew up in a small town out in the middle of nowhere called Gila Bend. Yeah, it's a place you go through quickly. When I was growing up, there wasn't a place to shop, a good place to shop for clothing and those kinds of things. And so when we had to shop, we came to Phoenix, which was a huge undertaking. It was a long ways. It was like 70 miles, so it seemed like it took forever. And when we got on when they built the new mall out on way out north on Bethany Home Road, we would drive on I-17 to get out to Penny's. That's where we always shopped. And I think it was right around Indian School or Camelback that when you're driving along, and this was a long time ago, that certain times of the day you would smell bread baking, because there was a wholesome bread factory right there on the freeway. And for just a few moments, as you're driving down the freeway, all the other smells of the highway went away, and your whole car was filled with the smell of baking bread. It was the best thing ever. It reminds me of growing up. My mom was a baker. She made pies and things, but she also made bread. She learned how to make bread from her mother, who I'm supposing learned to make bread from her mother. Now, in our case, my mom didn't make bread because we couldn't buy bread. She made bread as a special treat. Otherwise, we had we ate wholesome white bread, that square stuff. But when my mom would make bread, it took her all day. If you've ever made bread, you know there's a big process. You have to let the dough rise a couple of times, and you have to knead it until it's stretchy and the gluten is all mixed up in there so that it makes fluffy and nice loaves of bread. So oftentimes, when my mom, she worked most of the time I was growing up, but sometimes she had a day off, she would make bread, and as we came home from school in the afternoon, about 3:30, 4 o'clock, the house would be filled with the smell of baking bread. And we couldn't wait. My mom, I don't know why she started this, but my mom baked her bread in old tomato juice cans. You know, those big round ones, this tall. And so our loaves of bread, when my mom made bread, were round, which really fits well with bologna. Round. But the other thing that my mom did was when there wasn't, she would take the last bit of dough and she would make little tiny biscuits, and she would cook those in salsa cans, you know, those Ortega salsa cans, and so we had little breads. And our favorite, that's the part we got first, was the little breads. So she would throw those out, you know, tip them out of the can. You can't leave them in because they get sweaty. So you tip them out of the can right away as they come out of the oven. Hot, you know, piping hot, too hot to touch. But we oftentimes couldn't wait to break those little biscuits open, and steam would come out of them, you know, and the smell would hit you, and then you lather on the butter and just eat that wonderful bread. You see why I apologized? So, and I know bread sometimes, you know, gets a bad rap, but I like bread. I've been in restaurants where the bread was so good that I almost decided not to have anything else to eat but just bread. And still, sometimes in the evening, if I get a little bit hungry and I don't want to eat anything too heavy, I'll go to the fridge and I'll pull out the bread and I'll put some real butter on it, and I'll have my bread and butter as a snack because I really love a good loaf of bread. Well, historically, you could tell someone's status in the world by the color of the bread that they ate. The darker the bread, the poorer they were. So, because, you know, it takes a lot of money to get the grain refined. And so only rich people could have white bread. Now we all want to have brown bread, right? But back then, and even in biblical times, the poorer you were, the darker your bread was. And so as you climbed up the social ladder, if that was ever possible, your bread would get lighter as you climbed the ladder. We also use bread as a term for other things in our lives. Bread is slang for money. If we say we're earning our bread and butter, it means that we're working for a wage. When we're going to eat together, we say we're going to break bread. The town of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, means house of bread. Bread was an important part of sustaining life in biblical times. It wasn't a side dish like it is for a lot of us today. It was the main meal. It was what kept them alive. When there was nothing else that they could put on the table, they had bread. And bread was the staff of life, we call it. And so everyone who was listening to Jesus talk about bread and bread of life, they would have felt those hunger pangs probably, and they would have been able to taste the bread and even imagine the bread that Jesus was talking about. So in the story that was read to you this morning, it takes place with the crowd that Jesus has been with the day before. And in that story, if you go back and look the day before, this is where Jesus is preaching and it's time for dinner. There's nothing around, and the disciples say, what are we going to do? And that's when the loaves and fishes story comes. So this has happened the night before. Jesus is tired, and if you read again in the story, Jesus has left to go off to be by himself. He sent the disciples across the lake there, the sea, and so that he can walk and be alone and to get around to the other side where he's going to meet up with the disciples later. You might remember this is also that story about the storm on the sea and everything. You just need to go back and read that. So, A lot has happened in this day and a half that Jesus has been with these people. And so it's morning now, and the people wake up and realize that boats are gone, Jesus isn't there, and they try to figure out where Jesus is. They have to think about it. They've been asleep. It's morning. When you wake up, aren't you a little bit hungry? I am. And so they're looking around because, remember, Jesus has just fed them really good the night before. And so they get up and they wander around looking for Jesus, and they actually ask Jesus, "What are you going to do today?" I think they meant, "What miracle are you going to perform?" I think they might have meant, "Where's all the other loaves and fishes that was left over from last night?" They wanted another miracle. But Jesus knew that they needed something more than just bread for their bellies. And he also wanted them to understand, and he says to them, "What are you looking for? Are you just looking for me because I fed you? Or are you looking for me because of something else that you need?" Jesus had intentionally met their physical needs so that he could meet their spiritual needs. But evidently the memory of what Jesus had spoken about the night before hadn't really stuck with them, because all they were concerned about, it seems as if they needed to have their physical hunger satisfied once more. Now you remember that they talk about, in Scripture, they come to Jesus and say, "Well, we remember when the manna came and the Israelites were fed every day." And so, remember, they're also saying in their prayers, "Give us this day our daily bread." So it's a reminder of the manna that God provided to the Israelites while they were wandering, but it was also a reminder that these folks had to go buy bread every day. And so they wanted to know where their daily bread was coming from that day. I think they didn't understand what Jesus had tried to tell them the day before. And I think that Jesus understands that in order to get people's attention, just like us preachers today, we need to use illustrations that's going to get your attention. So bread is one of those really good ways. But in this moment, the Gospel of John records for us one of the I am statements that Jesus makes, one of the 6 I am statements that Jesus makes. And in this one, he says to them, "I am the bread of life." He doesn't say, "I might be the bread of life," or, I could be the bread of life if you want me to be. He says right there, "I am the bread of life." But I don't think people still got what he was saying. Again, they want proof. They want some miracle. What sign are you going to show us? What proof do you have that you are this bread of life? And I think Jesus tells them what he says to them to redirect their attention from what they might feel is their physical hunger to something deeper and more meaningful. He wants them to focus for a moment on the things that really matter, the thing that they really need, even though they don't know it yet. And the thing that he wants them to know is that there's something more that Jesus is going to offer them than just bread for today or bread for their physical needs. Jesus says, in essence, I want to imagine what it might be like to never be hungry again. He tells them, if you eat this bread, you're going to be hungry. Yes, you can have bread every day, and yes, it will fill you up, but you're going to need to eat every day. The kind of bread that I have to offer is bread that you can eat, and you will never be hungry again. You will be satisfied. And they're trying to figure out how that could happen, because they're trying to imagine, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to go shop for bread tomorrow? That I could just have all the bread I wanted to eat, and that I would never be hungry. You can imagine, these folks understand what hunger is. But they didn't know. They didn't know that the hunger that they had that went deeper than physical hunger was the hunger that Jesus was talking about satisfying. They were wandering around just like we do today, trying to figure out how it is to feed our spirits, and we think that we can buy one more thing, or do one more thing, or have one more thing, and then that will feed our spirits and we'll be satisfied. But we know, just as Jesus knew about those folks that day, they needed more than physical food. They had spirits that needed to be fed. We're not any different than those folks in biblical times. We might not have to shop for bread every day, and we might all have an opportunity to eat something more than just bread to sustain us. But we still wander around trying to feed our empty spirits with things that don't last and that don't really fill us up. You see, those people, and you've heard this before, they wanted someone to come and set them free from oppression. They wanted someone to come and provide for all their needs and to set them free and to help them have more than what they already had. And Jesus was telling them, I'm going to give you something more than that, something that goes deeper than that. I'm going to give you spiritual freedom. And yet all the people want from Jesus this day is another miracle, another loaf of bread, and another piece of fish. So what are we looking for? What are we hungering and thirsting for? Often I think it's right in front of us. It's obvious. It's like the treasures that I mentioned in my prayer meditation. You know, there's all sorts of things around us every day that we can treasure and take in and learn from. But sometimes we look for things to store and to keep and to treasure that don't really mean much. So I want to ask you to think about this. What are you hungry for? What is it that your soul and spirit needs? Where are you in the story of those folks gathered by the lakeshore with Jesus? Are you waiting for another miracle? Are you waiting for another moment to have your physical hunger fixed while letting your spiritual hunger go unnourished? Even if it isn't a part of our daily lives, some of us, and maybe all of us, have known that little bit of hunger that we have before we're able to satisfy our physical hunger. And there's that moment, that pang that you get, that sensation that you get that says, you know, I need to have something to eat. That same pang or that same feeling of needing something is our spirits also telling us that the spirit needs to be fed too. And oftentimes we have to learn to listen to that pang, to that spiritual need and necessity so that we can feed the right part of our bodies and feed our spirits. How can we be fulfilled spiritually? Well, we can do that by worshiping together, by having our prayers together and apart, by participating in small groups, and by doing the work out in the community of feeding those that are hungry and being with those that are in need. All of those things will feed us spiritually. We need to be aware of our spiritual hunger, maybe even more importantly than our physical hunger. Because Jesus said, and when he came, I am the bread of life. There is no better bread, brothers and sisters. It doesn't have that same maybe aroma as that bakery going down the freeway. But that feel and that taste and that knowing that our spirits are fed by Christ has got to be the most satisfying feeling in the world. Today we have an opportunity to have a little bit of spiritual food when we take communion together. It's just the beginning of what we need to do to keep our spirits nourished. Brothers and sisters, today, let us begin again to nourish our spirits.